We don't know why they did it. We don't know at this point the extent of their plans. It is possible that this was terrorist related, but we don't know. It's also possible that this was workplace related.
But the FBI is still being very cautious to call it anything just yet.
We do not yet know the motive. We cannot rule anything out at this point. It would be irresponsible of me, and it would be way too early for us to speculate on motive of why this occurred.
Joining me now, Bill Gavin, former assistant director at the FBI in New York, and Steve Rogers, a former military intel officer on the FBI National Joint Terrorism Task Force, and Stephen Yates, former Cheney Deputy National Security Advisor. Guys, just moments ago before the show, I tweeted out, do you think this is a combination of workplace and terrorism, sort of like a workplace jihad? So far, 90% of the respondents have said no. So I'll go to you first, Bill. We spent a lot of time last night speculating on what the motivation may be, and it felt like everyone had great points, and to a certain degree, everyone was spot on. But what is it? Is it workplace violence or is this terrorism?
Charles, my gut feeling still tells me that it's, if I had to choose between the two, it's terrorism. I appreciate the pressure under which the assistant director in charge out in Los Angeles is under. He has to be very careful as to what he says and what he doesn't say. I can probably be a little bit freer with my opinion. And when you have this kind of ammunition backed up, you have these kinds of weapons, you have the bombs, the 12 bombs that they discovered there backed up. This place was either a storage facility or a transshipment facility for other people involved. I believe that they're going to come, after they look at the phones and the computers, when they do a deep dive into those two things, they're going to come up with some additional people, and probably already have come up with some additional people that the intelligence and law enforcement forces may already know about. But I truly believe that we're dealing with some terrorism here.
Steve Rogers, 1,400 rounds in the car, 200 rounds for the handguns, another 4,500 rounds at their place, and 12 pipe bombs. I think one of the central issues here is why do we spend so much time trying to figure out the motivation, whether it was workplace violence or terrorism? Why is that important to get right?
Well, look, first of all, Charles, we are going to be engaging in a war unlike anything we've ever seen in this country before. The war is going to be fought here in the streets. We've said that consistently. And when I say we, I'm talking about the intelligence community, a lot of military generals, a lot of law enforcement people. The fact of the matter is that these individuals were not, it just didn't spark in their mind overnight that they were going to do this. A seed was planted at some time. It could be a bad encounter with a cop, a bad encounter with the government, and then it fostered and fostered. And now we're fighting a war.
Okay, I want to come back to this, but we've got breaking news right now. A report of a man with a gun at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center in San Jose. Large Sheriff's Deputy Department presence there already. The area is being searched. So far, no reports of any shots being fired. A shelter-in-place order has been issued, according to the hospital's spokesperson and KTVU report. We're going to keep you updated on this situation. We'll stay on top of that. And I want to come back now. Here's the thing, Stephen Yates. I guess the big question is if it was a one-off workplace violence, then, you know, maybe everyone can rest easy. But if this was some sort of terror cell, even if it was a premature move by these two to attack, because it felt like they were planning something much larger. And also, let's face it, there's an environment here that if we don't call it what it is, we're not going to fight it the right way.
Well, that's absolutely true. And there are a lot of elements of this that don't really add up just yet based on the information that we have in the public. I mean, number one, this target doesn't make very much sense. Why did they go after a facility that was basically going after people with special needs? It doesn't make any sense. The other thing is it's extremely unlikely that they would act alone. I agree completely with what was said before. You had essentially a profile of someone who had been maybe a loner. Then he makes some international travel, comes home with a new bride, starts growing his beard out and is seemingly following a pattern that's consistent with being radicalized. And then they go on this rampage with GoPro cameras and everything else. It's just, to me, this looks like they were testing what reaction would be. And it's probably others that were running them, is what we'll find out over time.
I do want to say that the police today have ruled out the GoPro cameras, the chief of police in San Bernardino. Maybe it will come back up, but so far they cannot, they have not been able to corroborate that. But Bill Gavin, I guess, listen, if you're piecing this together and we all play, we all watch enough mystery shows, we think we're detectives. You guys do this for a living. But it would seem like if you have a bomb factory, a bomb-making factory, you've converted your home into this, you've got enough ammunition to take down a small city, that they were premature. I don't know what their orders might have been, but something happened at that event, and it caused them to go ahead and scut whatever they were going to do and take these guys out, because obviously they could have shot and killed even more people within that facility.
Yeah, they sure could have. But, everything else that we've looked at, Charles, when we look at people going in, they plan their way in, but they plan to get caught or kill themselves or be killed by the police, so they don't plan an exit strategy. These people had an entrance and an exit strategy. They didn't stay in there that long. They killed as many people as they could using two separate clips in each one of those AR-15s, from what I understand, and then got out. They got out before the police arrived, and the police arrived within 4.5 minutes. They had an exit strategy. Why they did that, that's the $64,000 question. I don't know. The motive in this whole thing is a little scary. But I totally agree with you. They had all that ammunition. They had the bombs in that house. There is something much more dynamic than just these two people acting individually or acting as in concert, just doing this kind of thing.
As tragic as this thing is, we can say, thank God they didn't use all of the weapons and explosives at their disposal. But here's the thing, Steve. Also, I know they had an exit strategy, but once Syed left the party and came back, it was pretty obvious that someone was going to say, hey, this guy blew up earlier today. He would have been one of the first suspects. They didn't go on the run. They went back home and back to the neighborhood. So even though they had a clear exit strategy, they didn't go on the lam, so to speak. And so the whole thing continues to be very, very confusing. And I think that's so worrisome, because we don't know what the next thing could happen. We don't know what else is out there.
Well, that's absolutely right. What would have been the next thing? But I got to tell you, Charles, the story behind the story is the fact that at least one, we know, person in that neighborhood knew what was going on in that house, and I'm sure more have. Our American people have been so conditioned by the Justice Department. If you see something, say nothing. This is what happened here. And we're trying to get it across. If you see something, say something. And the president didn't really emphasize that today.
Well, I know you're speaking of the neighbor, and we're going to talk more about this whole politicization of this whole thing. But are you saying if let's say the neighbor said, hey, calls the police, something's odd. These guys keep getting these packages. They're clanking away in the middle of the night. How much could a police, you knock on the door, what do? Can you get a warrant based on something like that?
No, and the judge, Napolitano, did mention earlier today that the police can't do very much, but you can begin to keep an eye on things. Look, I've got to tell you something. Somebody says to me as an officer, there's 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7 Muslims going in and out, and right away when you say that,
that's
it's
what
racial.
You have to say. You've got to say it, though. You've got to put it out there. Just put it out there.
And you see the environment and what's going on. A good cop is going to say, you know what, let me pass it on to the detective bureau. Maybe they've got more information I don't know.
And, of course, maybe the perpetrators would have maybe canceled their plans or panicked or something, done something out of the ordinary if they knew they were under microscope.
Or they were connecting dots. Look, no one's saying all Muslims are bad. We got problems in all types of different ethnicities, etc. But in this case, this is not racial profiling.
All right,
we're looking for warriors.
Let's leave it right there. In the aftermath of this horrific massacre, many people are asking, could this have been prevented? Not just what Steve is talking about, but some other things. Some people say, hey, get rid of all the guns. We don't have to worry about it. It's a lot more complicated than that. Well, legally to go into the house and inspect it. But are we at a point in the society where you can couple that with the fact that they're Muslim and get some? And do you think we should go from there and say, hey, let's be honest, a wave of attacks around the world, particularly in the West, this should give us the right to go further?
You would start an investigation. And you know, it stems from the bottom line. They refuse to say what it is. When the attack in Colorado occurred by that psychopath Christian that attacked that abortion clinic, he was a Christian terrorist. This was a Muslim terrorist. People don't want to say it come out of their mouth.
Right, but how do you, in other words, let's say, okay, the political correctness fades away.
Right.
I mean, the majority of Americans now say homegrown terrorism is their greatest fear. So how do we prevent it?
We need people to be ready to open up about what they're seeing. If you see something, you report it. We need to communicate with each other, and we have to band together against this, because this could be a person sitting at his computer, and all of a sudden he's becoming radicalized, and the next thing is he's going to go out and shoot a place up. That is going to be impossible to figure that out if he's not communicating with people with ISIS or whatever. And how do you figure out what's in a person's mind?
And Charles, there's an added ingredient to what Bo's saying. We've got to go back to the days of community policing. Cops need to be out on the streets. They know the who, what, when, where, and why in the neighborhood. They know about Mrs. Smith sneezing down the street. When Bo talks about communication, he's right. A lot of communication with the street cop will be a lot to prevent something like this.
You know, the other thing, too, is we talk about 10,000 FBI agents. I say it on every show. We would deputize some of the cops back in the 70s, made U.S. Marshals sworn in. So, in other words, you could use cops from all over the country, tens of thousands of cops being sworn as U.S. Marshals to assist the FBI on certain things like this. If you have people that you think are suspicious or there's a possibility of them being terrorists, then you could put surveillance. You could do, and you know what the problem too is going to be? Try to get a wiretap. Try to get a wiretap on that house. You're not getting it anymore because everyone's worried about the Patriot Act is gone.
And cops need to know the government's going to back them. They need to know their leaders are going to back them.
That's the point I wanted to ask you, Eric.
Right.
Listen, it feels like to many people, President Obama has put interference in this. That and the left, of course, and it makes it so tough to have sort of an honest conversation and honest policing in this. Do you think this could change the tide?
No, I don't think it will, unfortunately. I wish it would. But, I mean, look at the immediate reaction. I was getting emails while the shooting was going on in Colorado last week, before facts were known. They were reporting it might be a bank robbery, from leftists saying, oh, it's another Republican, another white Republican. And with this incident, you had a number of prominent left-wing elites saying, oh, probably another Republican. Other news networks were reporting the location of Planned Parenthood in relation to the facility, thinking it was another white guy. It's just very sad that when tragedies like this happen, the conservative reaction is to think it's got to be a madman or an Islamic terrorist, and the left blames their common American political opponent.
Let's look at France, one of the most liberal countries. As soon as those attacks occurred, all bets are off. Warrants were thrown out. Everything is happening. It's going to happen in America when people are going to say, I don't care.
Some would say, Bo, then that means we live under permanent martial law, or it's just certain of us should live under permanent martial law.
Look, you got to unleash.
I don't agree with that. Okay. I agree with the fact that we need better intelligence where we can avert these kind of attacks.
Well, you get that through the street cops. You let them do their job and stay out of the way.
We're going to come back and talk about the politicalization of terror and, of course, this mass shooting, because, it didn't take long for President Obama and Hillary to start in on guns and those not squeezing the trigger. How about them sometime? We'll be right back.